It would be an absolute tragedy to deny a cast the sheer brilliance of a director like Jerry Paris, even for a single, fleeting episode. I would feel profoundly uncomfortable. Do you truly believe Ron Howard is Hollywood's golden boy, the calm, universally beloved director? Prepare to have that illusion shattered. Behind that famously gentle smile, he has harbored a secret, unwritten list of 7 stars. A list of individuals he solemnly swore he would never share a set with again. These weren't just colleagues, they were his friends, his mentors, even his heroes. They were the very people who helped him achieve Oscar glory, only to then utterly demolish the creative piece his career was built on. And once you discover their identities, you will finally understand why even Hollywood's kindest soul was forced to learn how to hold a grudge. At number 1, the formidable Russell Crowe. The volatile genius who single-handedly broke Ron Howard's legendary calm. Howard once confessed that Cinderella Man was the most punishing film of his entire life, and that agony had a name: Russell Crowe. From the very first day, their partnership was a ticking time bomb, destined for detonation. Crowe didn't arrive on set as an actor. He marched in like a general preparing for all-out war. He demanded control, command, and above all, confrontation. The very 3 things Howard had spent a lifetime avoiding. During A Beautiful Mind, they had already engaged in quiet skirmishes. But Cinderella Man in 2004 transformed that simmering tension into a raging inferno of open hostility. Crowe challenged every single choice: the lighting, the pacing, even the precise placement of a camera. In the midst of one particularly brutal boxing sequence, he bellowed across the ring, "You don't understand the character's pain." Howard simply stared back, his silence a mask for a brewing storm of fury. After that day, the crew whispered that it was like watching 2 titans locked in a monumental battle of wills. A suffocating weight fell over the set, growing heavier each week. Crowe began insisting on reshooting entire monologues, claiming he couldn't feel the emotion, while a desperate Howard fought tooth and nail to keep the entire schedule from imploding. The energy between them curdled into something truly toxic. In a private, unguarded moment, Howard confided to his producers that directing Crowe felt like trying to build a cathedral while riding a raging bull. Even after the film earned widespread praise, he unequivocally refused to reunite. Reporters relentlessly probed about another collaboration. Howard's answer remained unchanged, delivered with chilling finality: "Once was enough." Crowe himself would later admit their creative methods were far too different to ever truly blend. Now, for number 2, the chaotic force of nature, Jim Carrey. The green monster who allegedly pushed Ron Howard to the absolute brink of his sanity. Howard once joked that How the Grinch Stole Christmas very nearly stole his mind. What began as a whimsical Christmas fantasy in the year 2000 devolved into one of the most cataclysmic experiences of his entire career, and it was all because of Jim Carrey. The man was a paradox: brilliant, wildly unpredictable, and completely uncontrollable the moment the green prosthetics were applied. From the very first week of filming, the production descended into a state of absolute madness. Carrey was enduring a torturous 8 hours a day, entombed inside layers of latex and fur, and by just the 3rd day, his patience shattered, and he was snapping at everyone: makeup artists, assistants, and even Howard himself. During one now infamous morning, Carrey erupted, storming off the set and screaming, "You try acting inside a rubber coffin!" Howard attempted to pacify him, but Carrey's rage was a runaway train. He began improvising entire scenes without any warning, changing critical dialogue mid-take, sometimes throwing the script to the floor in a theatrical display of frustration. One crew member described the atmosphere as being like walking on broken glass. Howard's legendary composure finally cracked. He quietly placed a call to the Universal executives, explaining that the production was spiraling dangerously out of control. In response, the studio brought in a Navy SEAL survival expert, the very same man hired to train Carrey to endure the costume, all in a desperate attempt to keep the actor from walking off the set. By the time filming finally concluded, Howard looked utterly shattered. In every single behind-the-scenes photograph, when reporters cautiously asked about Carrey, he'd force a polite smile and state she brought a tremendous amount of energy, but in private, he confessed the grueling shoot had stolen years from his life. The movie became an immortal Christmas classic, but the professional damage was permanent. Howard vowed to never work with Carrey again. Number 3. Tom Cruise, when perfectionism ignited a war. It is almost impossible to imagine Ron Howard, Hollywood's most famously composed director, locking horns with the Titan, Tom Cruise, the most powerful and unstoppable star of the early 90s. But on the set of the 1992 epic Times, Far and Away Asterisk, what began as a dream pairing devolved into one of the most legendary power struggles in film history. At that time, Cruise was an untouchable force of nature, riding a tidal wave of success from Time's Top Gun Asterisk and Time's Born on the 4th of July Asterisk. Howard, in stark contrast, was meticulously cementing his reputation as a director who prized discipline and precision. Yet the collision between Cruise's explosive intensity and Howard's methodical order was immediate and fierce. Cruise demanded that every single movement detonate with raw, untamed emotion. Howard, conversely, was searching for quiet, patience, and surgical precision. Their creative visions were from two different universes. One fateful afternoon in Dublin, during a relentlessly rain-drenched sequence, Cruise abruptly stopped mid-take, violently threw off his gloves, and roared, "This doesn't feel real!" Howard's face turned to stone as he stared back and simply said, "Real isn't about noise, Tom." The entire crew fell into a stunned, deafening silence. That moment became the stuff of Hollywood legend. Nicole Kidman, standing literally between the two warring men, desperately tried to broker a peace. It was a futile effort. Cruise began rewriting the blocking on the spot, demanding endless retakes, and arguing the scene needed blood and guts, not calm composure. Howard's patient smile vanished for good. He was forced to start shooting extra coverage because he had lost all faith that Cruise could deliver the same performance twice. Months later, when asked about the torturous experience, he delivered a chillingly simple reply. Some people confuse passion with chaos, and he made certain to never cast Cruise again. Number 4, Mel Gibson, and the power struggle that nearly shattered Time's Ransom Asterisk. Ron Howard thought he was hiring a consummate professional. What he got instead was a war-torn battlefield. In 1996, Asterisk Ransom Times was supposed to be the perfect cinematic marriage. The calm, steady director, Howard, and the force of nature, Mel Gibson, fresh off his monumental Oscar victories for Time's Braveheart Asterisk. But from the very second the cameras rolled, the set descended into a brutal tug-of-war for absolute control. Gibson didn't just want to act in the film, he wanted to conquer it. Howard's scripts were famously, meticulously tight, his direction precise. Gibson ripped that order to shreds. He openly challenged the lighting, rewrote dialogue mid-scene, and barked commands like a second director staging a coup. During one explosive confrontation, witnesses say Gibson slammed his script down on the table with furious force and bellowed, "I know what the audience wants! I want an Oscar for it!" Howard's reply was quiet, but every word was a dagger. "You're not the director of this one, Mel." The air on set went dead cold. From that day forward, every scene felt like a duel. Gibson defiantly refused to do multiple takes, claiming his raw spontaneity was what made him real. In a brilliant countermove, Howard began shooting backup footage in secret. The toxic tension began to poison the entire set. The situation grew so dire that Universal executives were forced to visit the set on 2 separate occasions to keep the entire production from completely imploding. When Time's Ransom Times finally wrapped, the profound exhaustion was etched onto every single face. The movie was a phenomenal success, but Howard would later call it the most emotionally draining project of my entire life. Gibson, meanwhile, publicly praised the film, but, in a silence that spoke volumes, never mentioned Howard's name again. Unsurprisingly, Howard vowed never to work with him again. And now, for number 5, Marlon Brando, the Titan of Hollywood, who would become the absolute bane of Ron Howard's existence. Howard himself once famously declared that directing Marlon Brando was like attempting to negotiate with a Category 5 hurricane. Their collision in the mid-1990s was a brief but cataclysmic event. From the moment Brando stepped on set, he was a thundercloud of pure contempt. He utterly despised schedules, treated rehearsals as a personal insult, and flatly refused to commit a single word of dialogue to memory. Consequently, every cue card had to be plastered all over the set, allowing him to steal furtive glances during a take. Then, one fateful afternoon, he brought the entire production to a screeching halt, proclaiming, "This dialogue is absolute garbage. Rewrite it, now." A stunned Howard attempted to mediate, but Brando simply offered a cryptic smile and leisurely strolled back to his trailer, vanishing for a full 3 hours. Upon his grand return, he announced that his character now required an entirely new, unheard-of accent. The cameras began to roll, plunging the entire crew into a state of utter confusion. Howard, a director legendary for his unshakable patience, finally felt his composure begin to fracture. In a rare private moment, he confessed to his crew, "This isn't acting. It's pure sabotage." Mere weeks later, the entire project imploded. Brando's chaotic unpredictability had completely decimated the schedule, hemorrhaged the budget, and left Ron Howard utterly humiliated before the studio heads. From that day forward, he never publicly uttered Brando's name again, but Hollywood insiders whisper that the ordeal profoundly changed him. The once cherished dream of collaborating with a legend had twisted into a waking nightmare, a harrowing lesson that forced Ron Howard to swear he would never again mistake sheer genius for unadulterated madness. Now, for number 6. Hugh Grant, the man whose polite smile reportedly concealed a personality Ron Howard found insufferable. Beneath the veneer of British charm and tailored suits, Hugh Grant wielded a razor-sharp tongue, one that sliced far deeper than anyone anticipated, particularly Ron Howard. Their dramatic confrontation unfolded not on a bustling film set, but within the hallowed halls of power across boardroom tables and at exclusive Hollywood lunches in the early 2000s, when Howard was eyeing Grant for a leading role in a romantic dramedy from his powerhouse studio, Imagine Entertainment. What was intended to be a relaxed, creative discussion shockingly devolved into a disaster within mere minutes. Grant sauntered in late, exuding an air of complete dismissiveness, and proceeded to openly ridicule the very Hollywood system upon which Howard had built his entire empire. "You Americans seem to believe every emotion requires an explosion," he allegedly quipped, a smug smirk playing on his lips as Howard sat across the table, his expression like granite. That single act of staggering arrogance poisoned the atmosphere. Grant then proceeded to tear Howard's script to shreds, dismissing it as excessively sentimental and insinuating that the studio was utterly incapable of understanding true wit. This was no friendly banter, it was a masterclass in condescension. As the disastrous meeting drew to a close, Howard calmly closed his notebook, looked Grant in the eye, and delivered the final verdict. "I believe we are looking for two very different things." That single sentence was a death knell for their collaboration. The film was ultimately made with a different leading man, and Howard made a silent, solemn vow to never again consider working with Hugh Grant. Years later, in various interviews, Grant's signature sarcasm about American directors would bubble to the surface, labeling them as earnest to a fault. It was a thinly veiled jab, and fans immediately knew exactly who he was targeting. Behind the scenes, insiders claimed that Howard was absolutely incandescent with rage. He ensured that Hugh Grant's name was permanently blacklisted from any and all of his future production slates. And now, number 7, Chevy Chase, the one walking catastrophe that Ron Howard refused to go anywhere near. In a stunning turn, Ron Howard didn't even need the first-hand experience to despise the very notion of working with him. The mere mention of Chevy Chase's name was enough to send shivers down his spine. Back in the late 1980s, the executives at Universal made the fateful suggestion of pairing them for a massive, big-budget comedy. Howard's rejection was instantaneous and absolute, delivered before a single meeting could even be put on the calendar. His message to his producing partner, Brian Grazer, was brutally blunt: "I will not babysit a hurricane." Even by that point, Chase's toxic reputation had already blazed a path of destruction through Hollywood. During his time on Saturday Night Live, he had infamously clashed with almost every single member of the cast. Years later, on the set of Community, his behavior reportedly escalated, as he infamously stormed off, verbally assaulted writers, and branded his co-stars as lazy. Howard didn't need a front-row seat to this meltdown. The chilling stories from fellow directors were more than enough to seal Chase's fate. When word got back to Chase that Howard had rejected him, he allegedly mocked the director at a party, sneering that he only works with nice guys. The implication was clear: must be boring as hell. Howard's response was both icy and devastatingly precise. That is exactly the point. From that day forward, Chase's name became the ultimate Hollywood shorthand for the kind of toxic behavior Howard refused to tolerate, a reputation that would follow him for decades. When the Community drama reignited a firestorm around Chase's temper, Howard was asked if he'd ever reconsider directing him. His answer was swift and absolute. "Some chaos," he implied, "simply isn't worth capturing on film." Which of these 7 shocking names left you completely stunned? Do you believe Ron Howard was right to cut them off, or did ego get in the way of creating cinematic greatness? Unleash your opinions in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more of the untold Hollywood sagas that no one else has the courage to reveal.